Hello, welcome or welcome back to the Yarn and Yarns YouTube channel. My name is Angela and all the places you can find me should be linked in the description box below this video. Here on the channel you'll find me chatting about my adventures in knitting, spinning, crochet and weaving, all of the fibre related things. Today's video is a spinning video and I'm going to be chatting all about support spindle spinning today. If you followed the channel for a little while, you may be aware that I have developed a deep and undying love with the craft of support spindling over the last couple of years. And a little while ago I posted a video sharing some thoughts, hints, tips, tricks on how to get started with support spindles, as a lot of people had reached out to me and said that they were interested in trying the craft or they had a support spindle but were really struggling to get going with it. So I popped that video up quite a few months ago, and since then I've had lots of lovely feedback on that video and also some comments and some people reaching out to say that they managed to get started but they were having some issues still sort of sustaining their spins and still couldn't quite get to grips with it. So I thought it'd be time for me to share another video chatting all about support spindles and maybe sharing some thoughts about troubleshooting if you're still struggling a little bit to maintain your spins with the spindle. I won't be chatting about how to get started today. If you do want some of my thoughts, some hints and tips and tricks on that, then I'll post a link to that previous video, so you might want to pop back and have a look at that one. But I thought today it might be useful to chat about spindles themselves, spindle bowls, fibre prep, and maybe do a little bit of spinning and just chat about what I am doing with my hands, what I'm feeling as I spin through a little chunk of fibre. It's really difficult, I think, to kind of help and guide someone, and if you're not in the same room with them, in terms of sort of troubleshooting specific problems. But I'm hoping that by sharing some thoughts in this video that maybe something will click with someone out there who might be having trouble with their spins. As with my previous video where I was sharing about getting started, I do want to preface this by saying I'm not putting myself out there as any sort of expert. This is all things that I have learnt, things that help me through trial and error, and also things that I've picked up through consuming various sort of content, written, video, all sorts of things out there have kind of fed into my little knowledge bank for things that work for me. But as with most of our craft, there really is no right or wrong way to do things. If you are producing something that you're happy with, then you're doing it right. I'm a firm believer in that for most of our crafts there are efficient ways to get things done. So for knitting and crochet, I think there are more efficient ways to hold your needle, your hook, to work your yarn, and the same for spinning. There are more efficient ways to do things. However, if that doesn't feel right to you and you have got some other method for doing things and it works, then no one can tell you you're doing it right or wrong. So yeah, these are just, as I say, my thoughts and some things that have helped me as I have been amassing a collection of spindles and spinning away on my support spindles for the last couple of years. As with many of our crafts, the things that we can chat about, the knowledge that we can share is almost like a bottomless pit. I could probably make a whole video chatting about my spindle collection, for instance. I could probably make a separate video chatting about vessels and bowls and ways in which you can spin with your support spindles. I could probably make a whole video chatting about fibre prep. So yeah, this really is just designed to be a broad overview, touching on some of the basics, hopefully. So let's talk about spindles first. And again, as with most of our crafts, there are a huge variety of beautiful spindles, tools that we can use in this craft to make our yarn. Each individual spindle will have its merits, will have its advantages, its disadvantages, and it could be that a particular type of spindle will suit you better, both in terms of your ability to use that spindle to flick and add the twist that you need to make the yarn, in terms of your ability to make the kind of yarn that you want to. So that's something that's definitely worth thinking about as you are embarking on your own support spindle journey. What sort of yarn are you hoping to make, and what sort of spindle might work better for that purpose? Again, I'm a firm believer in, with a bit of hard work, you can pretty much put your tools to work in any way that you want to, but there are definitely tools out there that are designed specifically for making different types of yarn. So why make it hard for yourself by choosing something that maybe isn't designed specifically for the thing that you want to do? I have, over the last couple of years, amassed quite a large collection of support spindles. I haven't actually counted up my collection. And maybe I'll do a whole video sharing my entire spindle collection. If anyone's interested in that, then let me know in the comments below. But I must have, at this point, more than 10 spindles in my collection. I think probably quite a few more than 10. And I recognise that when you're getting started out and you don't know if you're going to progress in this craft, if you're going to enjoy it, then buying up a whole different bunch of spindles is not practical and not within everyone's budgets. My collection has built over the course of a few years. If you've got a friend, for instance, like me, who has a large collection of spindles, maybe you could speak to them nicely and try out a few spindles before you decide what sort of thing works for you, because there are so many different variations that you can go for. So let's chat about some of those. So let's talk about construction first. I've grabbed 3 spindles from my collection that are kind of the 3 extremes, or 2 extremes and 1 middle ground in my spindle collection. Weight of spindle can affect your ability to spin the yarn that you want, and also your enjoyment while you're spinning the yarn. So my first ever spindle that I purchased was this beauty, which is from Enid Ashcroft, who is a fabulous spindle maker here in the UK. And actually this is still one of my favourites. So I think when you find a good spindle maker that you enjoy their tools, I think that makes a huge world of difference. And I've got 3 or 4 Enid Ashcroft spindles now. But this represents a sort of medium weight from my collection. So this spindle weighs 37 grams, I think, which I think is quite a good medium weight spindle to get started with. There is enough weight in the spindle to make it kind of spin with quite easily without putting too much pressure and tension on your fingers. Also, it spins for a good amount of time. I've also grabbed these 2 from my collection. These represent the heaviest and the lightest spindles in my collection. So this one is probably my least favourite spindle in my collection, and it weighs just 7 grams. And I picked this up from Etsy, and honestly I can't remember the seller, but I'm sure if you pop in support spindles you'll see a few sellers who have things similar to this, and it really didn't cost hardly anything. But the spinning experience actually isn't that great. The spindle is so light, it's really hard to make yarn with this, I find personally. I can spin on this, but I just find it a little bit of a chore. So I would say don't necessarily get sucked into buying the cheapest spindle that you can find, because as well as this being the lightest spindle that I own, it's also the cheapest spindle I've ever bought. And yeah, it wasn't that great of an investment. Okay, I didn't spend too much money on it, but I don't use it very often, so in effect it's a little bit of a waste. So if you're looking to buy a spindle, I would say do your research. There are lots of spindle makers all over the place. Obviously Etsy is one place. A lot of folks have their own shops. Check out reviews, follow some hashtags on Instagram if you're an Instagram user, and see what spindles are out there and what folks are using. And then I've also got one of my more recent spindles. It's my heaviest spindle. This one weighs in at close to 55 grams. It's a beautiful glass tipped spindle. This one is from Mingo Asho. These are not cheap. They are definitely an investment, but they're beautiful and I love this, so I have no regrets about buying it. It's on the heavier side. Again, it spins beautiful yarns. You're someone who likes to spin lace weight yarns, you're going to have to put more effort into spinning this to get enough twist into your fibre if you're wanting to make really thin yarns. So that might be something just to bear in mind. I want to briefly mention, as we're talking about spindle type, you can get a variety of different lengths of the spindle shafts, and you might have a preference for that too, so that might be something worth bearing in mind when you are shopping. So let me just share with you a few extremes. So again, I'm going to use this Enid Ashcroft as my sort of median, and I have got a resin tipped spindle. This one came from an Etsy seller called Alchemist Storage. They don't always have spindles in their shop, and this is the longest in terms of sort of shaft length that I own. If I pop the Enid Ashcroft up alongside it, you can see it's a couple of inches longer than what I'm using as my sort of average. And then I also have this gorgeous little spindle, which is from the Spindle shop in Australia, and this is my smallest spindle, and you can see that's a couple of inches shorter again than the Enid Ashcroft. And if I compare the longest and the shortest, There's a huge difference between those. You might want to bear that in mind. Obviously, the longer the shaft, potentially the more fibre you can pack onto it. But also in terms of consistency of your yarn, the more fibre you pack onto the shaft, the heavier the shaft's going to get, and therefore the more effort you're going to have to put into flicking the spindle to get the same amount of twist into your fibre as the weight sort of grows. So bigger is not always better, depending on what sort of yarn you might be aiming to achieve. Now, if you're looking at my collection of spindles and thinking, I can't buy all of these spindles, then don't worry. As I say, you don't have to. I would say get yourself a good medium weight spindle to start with, to see if you enjoy the craft, and then you can expand your collection over time if, like me, you fall in love with it. And I would say 50-50 my spindles come from me purchasing new directly from sellers. I think the other 50% of my collection have been obtained through D-Stash. So I follow a couple of groups on Ravelry and a couple of groups over on Facebook. Some are sort of general spinning groups, some are more sort of specialised and support spindle groups, and often in those groups there'll be folks who are selling on their spindles. Looking out for D-Stash threads is a great way to grow your collection and find out what sort of style, what sort of weights of spindle that you enjoy without spending as much money as you might do if you were to buy them new. As well as varying weights, support spindles can come in a variety of different styles as well. And I'm not going to dwell on that for too long, because again, I think that's a subject for a whole video in of itself. But I thought I'd just share with you a few different styles that you can get. This again is the Enid Ashcroft spindle that I already shared. This is more like a cup style spindle, and this one has a little brass tip on it. So you might often see spindles in this style, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see that little brass tip on the end, hopefully. That sort of cup style spindle also can come in a variety of different shapes. As you see, that one was more sort of short and round. This one is a little bit taller. And this spindle does not have a brass tip or a metal tip on the end, pure sort of wooden tipped spindle. And this one is another UK spindle maker. This one is from IST Craft. As well as this sort of style support spindle, you can also get what is more commonly known as a Russian style spindle. And again, I have one here from Enid Ashcroft. And Russian spindles, I believe, again, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure there'll be gaps in my knowledge, and some of these terms get used interchangeably, so it can be a little bit confusing. But I believe a Russian style spindle tends to be a little bit lighter and is great for making finer weight yarns. And as you can see, the base of this spindle is a slightly different shape, and this is more like a drop shape or a pear sort of shape. This one happens to have a brass tip, but again, they can come with and without. And then you can also get sort of goddess style or fang style spindles. And I have one here from Alice Savage, who is a spindle maker in Europe. She's based in Italy. As you can see, this spindle has a very sort of curved nature. I didn't have an empty spindle in this style to show you, so yeah, this is one of my current spins in progress. But I thought I'd still just share with you to sort of show you the different styles. I guess this would be more like a Russian sort of style, because it's got that lighter weight drop tip. So yeah, there we go. There's a few different style spindles that you might see, and over time you may develop a preference for spinning with one or another. I enjoy spinning with them all. This style of spindle I've come into more as I've got a little bit of practice with the basic support spindle techniques. I think if I was going to make a recommendation, I would suggest going with something a bit more medium weight. So that was a short overview of some different types and styles of spindle. All that to say, there are lots of different styles that suit lots of different folks out there, and over time you might develop a preference. And if you have started on your sport spindling journey and you're finding you're struggling, it might be that you just haven't yet found the right spindle for you. Let's talk about bowls and vessels which you can use with your support spindles, because although I've just said that maybe you haven't found the right spindle for you, it could be that you have a fabulous spindle but you just haven't found the right vessel to use with it in terms of the surface for spinning your spindle. And I have found that in some cases it can make a really big difference to the quality of the spin and your enjoyment for using a spindle, just by switching out the spindle bowl that you are using. Sometimes you'll see support spindles being sold in a set and they come with their own spindle bowl. This is a good example of that. My IST Craft spindle came with its own little wooden bowl, and so I think the sort of well-known, the experienced, the popular spindle makers will be reasonably well versed in what works well with their spindles in terms of the vessel that you're using. I've got a couple of little wooden bowls like this that have come in spindle set. When I purchased my beautiful Mingo Asho glass tipped spindle, it also came with this amazing handmade little glass bowl in the shape of a heart, and again these work lovely together. Oh, see, I could just get so much joy. I could just, regardless of whether I'm actually making yarn, I could just sit and spin my spindles and that will keep me happy and keep my hands busy and my heart happy. I know, I'm a bit weird. You can say it. Of course, not every spindle is going to come with a matching bowl, and I have used a variety of different things to spin my spindles in. Sometimes I have had my first spin with one of my new spindles and been a little bit on the fence with it, and then just swapped out the bowl that I'm spinning it in and had a much better spinning experience. So I would highly encourage you to play around with what you're using to support your support spindles. So I've got a couple of examples of the things that I use. I have purchased a couple of things that are specifically marketed for support spindles, and I've got one of them here to share with you. And this again is a tool that I purchased from Enid Ashcroft, and it's just a sort of lap bowl. It has this wooden disc in the middle which has a slightly indented surface in which to place your spindle, and this is lovely to work with. Mine has gotten a little bit battered over time, and I was a little bit disappointed with myself when I felt like I'd ruined this beautiful piece of artwork in itself. In the first instance, I don't know how well it's showing up on the screen, but a drink got spilt on this bowl and it took off a top layer of the coating. I guess it had been varnished, and I was just so gutted when that happened. Not sure if you can see the difference in the texture. This is a lot lighter and whiter, and I felt like I'd kind of ruined this beautiful thing. The other thing that's happened with this bowl is I have been using it to spin my brass tipped spindles in, and when I first purchased this, the sort of centre of this spinning stand, should we call it, was lovely and smooth, but because I was using my brass tip on a wooden base, it's kind of worked a few gouges into that sort of spinning disc in the middle. And at first I was really annoyed with myself so I'd kind of ruined this beautiful thing, but then I stopped and took pause and thought, I haven't ruined it, I've used it. And I have quite a few vintage tools in my possession, and I love them for the fact that they do show wear and tear. They have been used, they have been loved, they haven't been put on a pedestal and just admired. And you know, these are spindles, our tools that we go along with them are meant to be used, and you know, if there's a few dinks and nicks and scratches and marks, we haven't ruined them, we've used them and we've loved them and we've enjoyed them. And this still spins perfectly well, even though I was a bit worried that my sort of gouging of that centre disc might affect my spinning experience. It really hasn't. I have also purchased in the past a lap bowl, and I'll pop a picture of one on the screen. I don't have it in my possession any longer because I personally did not get on with this style of bowl, designed to be sort of gripped between your legs and then you can spin on your lap. However, my preferred way of spinning is to be sat on the floor, and I'll have my spinning bowl by my side. Because of various issues that I have with my back and with sciatica, I am least comfortable when I'm sat in this sort of upright standard sitting position that is normal for most human beings. It's actually the most painful way for me to live my daily life. So having that bowl, which can only really be used, it can't really be balanced, it has to be gripped. So having that bowl that has to be gripped between my legs did not work for me, but it might work for you. I have since passed it on to a friend of mine who has been really enjoying using it. So as you progress, if you start to enjoy your support spindling, it's definitely worth trying out these sort of different style of bowls to be working your spindles in, as well as tools that have been marketed specifically for being used with support spindles. I've also picked up a variety of different vessels from my local charity shops, and I have this ceramic bowl, and it has a slight indent in the middle of this bowl, which is perfect for my support spindles to sort of nestle in and work in. I also have this glass candle hold, and it has quite a nice wide open, I guess it's for a tea light, it's quite a nice wide open bowl, and I have enjoyed using this as well. This one isn't perfect, quite flat in the bottom here, but it definitely works with a lot of my spindles. So yeah, I would say keep an eye out in your local secondhand shops, your local charity shops, for various little bowls and things. I have seen folks turn these sorts of things upside down, and sometimes like saucers and little bowls will have rims, which are great for resting the tips of your support spindles in. You don't have to spend a lot of money to experiment, and I would say if you're going to pick up a few things, then try and pick up some different materials. So if you can spot a wooden bowl, if you can spot a ceramic bowl, if you can spot a glass bowl, you know, for just a few pence in your local secondhand shops, then they're worth picking up. You're not spending a whole bunch of money if they don't work out, and it may be that just by changing the surface that you spin on, you'll have a much better experience with your support spindle. Okay, so we've chatted spindles and how maybe different styles of spindles might be better for certain spinners. We've chatted spindle bowls and how your spindle bowl might affect your ability to have a nice spinning experience with your spindle. Let's talk fibre prep. The very nature of a sport spindle means that you are most likely to be doing a long draw spinning technique, and long draw is perfect for woolen style yarns and woolen prep fibre. Although, as I'm going to show you later on in the video, you can definitely spin with worsted preparation fibre. However, let's take a look at a few different types of fibre prep, how they might affect your spinning experience with a support spindle. Okay, so I've switched around, I've moved across my room because I'm sat at my table now, and we're going to get to a little bit of spinning as I'm chatting about different fibre preps. And I do want to preface this section by saying that I am going to be spinning in front of me on a table, and I feel like I've seen quite a lot of spindle spinning videos demonstrating this, and this is not how I usually do my sport spindle spinning. I'm doing it this way because it's easiest for me to set up my camera and share what I'm doing, but usually I would personally be sitting on the floor and I would have my bowl and my spindle to the side of me, and I will be drafting sort of across my body, but my sort of spindle and my bowl will be at quite a low angle. While I'm up at the table, I'm going to be holding my arms sort of up here rather than down here. It's not a very good demo, but yeah, I just thought I would mention that this is not my preferred position for support spindling. So again, that might be something that you consider when you're thinking about your support spindle journey, and if you've been having some issues and some troubles, maybe think about changing up the position in which you place your spindle and your bowl or whatever vessel you're using to flick your spindle in. Let's talk about combed top first, because I feel like a lot of people will recognise this fibre prep, and I've got a little sort of mini skein of combed top, and all of the fibres in this braid are aligned, so when I pull this out you can see all of those fibres are heading in the same direction, which I think is great when you are using both of your hands to draft as you are spinning. However, the very nature of support spindling means you're going to be flicking and balancing your spindle with one hand, and you have one hand to draft. So by the very nature of spindle spinning, you're going to be letting a little bit of twist, or sometimes a lot of twist, travel up into your fibre supply. And if you have got a big clump of comb top and you're trying to spin from this comb top, if you can imagine, this twist is going to go up into your yarn fairly quickly. I've just literally just put one twist with my fingers into this bit of comb top, and I'm really tugging on this, and there's a lot of resistance there. It's very hard for me to draft out because the twist has travelled up into this big supply here and has already locked into the fibre. And you can try that yourself at home with a bit of combed top. You know, just literally just put one twist into it in your hand and pull it out, and it's really hard to pull out. So if you're trying to spin on your support spindle from comb top without any further preparation, I think you're gonna get into trouble quite quickly in terms of being able to produce a consistent and a nice finely spun yarn, if you want finely spun yarn. If you have been getting stuck with your support spindling and you've been trying with comb top, it could just be down to that your twist is getting straight up into your comb top supply, and it's just so hard then to draft out. I mean, it's hard to try and draft that out with two hands, let alone when I'm trying to support a spindle in one hand and just using one hand to draft that out. So let's do a quick demo with the spindle. So you're obviously sitting facing me now, and I have just attached a little bit of comb top. This happens to be Shetland. It's just a couple of staple length cloths, and I have attached it to my spindle. I've started to get going. I've done no fibre prep to this other than just attach it to my spindle. I pre-drafted a little bit of the tip to get myself attached. So if I start spinning directly from this foam top, I'm going to move the angle up slightly so you can hopefully see my hands a little bit better. I'm going to be flicking the spindle with my right hand and my fibre supply is in my left, and just by doing that one flick my twist has started to travel up my fibre supply and it's already gone into my fibre supply here, and it's starting to get pretty twist locked already. I can draft this back, but it's quite hard work to get started because there was quite a thick bit of fibre in the sort of tip of my fibre supply, and it's just not a smooth process. I've had to really give that a tug back. And by having such a large quantity of fibre in my hand, it's going to be really hard for me to sort of control the thickness of the yarn that I'm producing. And already I can see I've got quite a thick bit of yarn here, which is leading up to my spindle, and then I've got a finer bit as I gave that fibre a really good yank as I was trying to pull a quantity away from the sort of bulk of my fibre supply. So let's try that again. I'm just giving it like one flick, and again I'm finding it really hard. I'm having to put a lot of pressure on this fibre to get it to move even slightly, and again as I'm moving it out, I don't know how well you can see that. Let's try and focus in on this. I'll try and zoom in when I'm editing, but I've got a really thick slub here, and then I've got quite a thin bit of yarn as it heads back into the fibre supply, where I've had to really put a lot of pressure onto that to draft it out of the main fibre supply. That's going to happen like all the way through. I think you can see the other side of this slub is thin as well, which if you're aiming for a thick and thin yarn, then great, this might be a great technique to try. But if you're aiming for consistency with your yarn, then spinning directly from this comb top where your twist is heading up into your fibre supply with no sort of prior preparation is making it really hard to get a consistent yarn. Let's see what happens. We'll do a little bit of pre-drafting this fibre and we'll see whether that makes it any easier. So I'm just going to break that off for now, and I'm going to just gently tease this out in my hands. Again, we're not doing anything else other than just pre-prepping that a little bit. All I do to rejoin on my fibre is just hold them on top of each other. Most sort of protein based fibres want to be together, they want to stick together which is why we often have a lot of trouble with felting when it comes to our fibre grafts. But in the case of joining for spinning, this makes it really easy because I'm just going to flick my spindle and already that's starting to join on. And again, it's joined. It's not the most stable of joins, as I'm not really paying much attention. I'm just trying to get going again, but it is joined nonetheless. Just going to wind that on a little bit and make sure that that's properly attached to my spindle. So we've got our pre-drafted fibre, and I'm just going to do a quick flick of the spindle again and see what we get in terms of ease of making yarn. So that's a little bit better. I'm finding it easier to draft out of my main fibre supply, but I'm still getting quite a few sort of thick and thin slubs of yarn, and we can fix that. It's not the end of the world. So I can go back along my fibre here, and I'm going to put my fingers either side of that slub and I'm going to gently tease that out again. So I can fix it, or at least make it a little bit better, but it's very stop-start spinning. If I'm going to be doing that every time I'm drafting back into my fibre supply, that's going to make this a really slow process. So yeah, it can be done, and this pre-drafting has definitely made it easier, but I'm still getting quite a few inconsistencies in my yarn. Thick bits and thinner bits. I don't know how easy it is to see that on the camera. That's a thicker bit, that's a thinner bit, and it's going thinner again as we come up to the fibre supply. So I can definitely make yarn from comb top with my support spindle, but it's not the smoothest of spinning experiences, and I might be coming back to do quite a little bit of second drafting to even out slubs. That's a much nicer, a much smoother, a much easier spinning experience just by drafting out my fibre a little bit, although again my yarn is not super consistent. These comb top preparations really shine when you're spinning in a worsted style, so when you're sort of smoothing back your fibres as you're spinning. So that's perfect when you're drop spindling, because you're using both of your hands to draft your fibre supply after you have twisted your spindle. It's perfect for working on your wheel because you are, again, using both of your hands to draft out your fibre supply as you're spinning. But with this kind of support style spinning, you can't really let go of your spindle because it goes awry, and as you can see, I tried to do it and I got in a complete mess. So you're always going to need one hand to support your spindle. You can definitely make yarn straight from comb top, but for me, on a support spindle, it's not the smoothest spinning experience. If to this point you have been trying to spin directly from your comb top and that's the thing that's been giving you issues, maybe it's time to think about using your fibre in a different way or using a different fibre preparation. So we'll come back to comb top in a bit, because in the very last section of this video I'm going to sit and spin for a little while and just chat to you about what I'm feeling, what my hands are doing, and I'm actually going to be using comb top for that. But I'm going to be using comb top in a particular way with my support spindle, so we'll circle back to that in a while. But let's chat Rolags and bats before we do the final spin demonstration. Okay, so let's talk bats, fibre bats. These can be made on drum carders or on blending boards, and this is a small bat that I made myself on my drum carder. And the fibres in a bat can be fairly aligned or they can be fairly jumbled depending on how the bat has been prepped. I prepped this one myself on my drum carder and it's a relatively smooth preparation. It's mostly several colours of Corriedale fibre with a little bit of sari silk blended in. One of the characteristics of this fibre prep is it can be quite light, puffy and floofy. So this bat I just weighed is 22 grams worth of fibre, and in comparison this mini braid is 25 grams of fibre. So you can see the difference. In the comb top, the fibres have been quite compacted, and I can definitely poof this out. I can pre-draft this, I can make it look a little bit more like this, but that's going to take an extra bit of work in terms of fibre prep to get my compacted little comb top braid to look anything like this. So I thought that was just a fun sort of little comparison there. Very similar amounts of fibre, but they are looking very different in terms of the space that they take up. So I'm going to unwrap my bat. There are lots of different ways that you can spin from a bat, but for the purposes of this video I just want to try spinning on the support spindles from a bat, and I'm just going to tear a strip off of the side. Okay, so I've now got my empty spindle. I've got my strip that I pulled off the side of my bat, and I'm just going to get myself started. I'm not going to do anything fancy with this. I'm just going to wrap a little bit of the unspun fibre around itself onto the spindle to get myself attached. Again, if you want to see some tips and tricks about how to get started with the support spindle, I have another video chatting all about that. Yeah, I'm attached, I'm ready to go, and this is not going to be the most consistent thickness of yarn because it does have the texture from the sari silk in, but we're not necessarily looking entirely just at consistency for this video. We're looking at the experience of working with the different fibre preps and the support spindle. So in the same way that I did for the comb top, let's give this spindle a flick, just one flick, and then we've let our twist travel up into the fibre supply, and I'm just going to draft back. And already, although my yarn is not super consistent because of the picture of the fibres that have gone into it, already just this whole experience of working from this fibre, which is quite a bit more open, the fibres are crossing, they're not all going in the same way. I can add a fair amount of twist, I can let a fair amount of twist travel up into that fibre supply and still not have to put a lot of pressure onto the fibre supply to pull back and start actually making yarn. As you can see, I've already, just with that one spin, pulled the fibre supply quite a distance back from that support spindle with literally little to no effort. With the comb top, I was really having to put a lot of effort into pulling that fibre back to make my yarn. One flick of the spindle, I'm supporting it in my hand, I'm letting the fibre twist build up, and I'm just pulling back, and it's pulling back nice and easily. My yarn is quite thick and thin, but that's more to do with this bit here being containing quite a lot of the sari silk rather than anything else. And yeah, as you can see, my arm's gone right off the screen there and I could probably pull back some more with, again, little or no effort. So already this preparation, this bat, where the fibres have been opened up, they're quite light and airy, they're slightly jumbled, not entirely, but they're slightly jumbled. This is proving to be a much nicer spinning experience than working straight from that comb top. Even the combed top that I had pre-drafted was a lot harder to draft back and work with the support spindle than this bat that I've done nothing to other than just pull a strip off of. So yeah, just that quick experiment and changing up my fibre prep has made the world of difference to my spinning experience with the support spindle. So the final little experiment for this part of the video is going to be working with some Rolags, and actually I've got two slightly different styles of Rolags to experiment with for this section of the video. So I've got a Rolag that I made on my blending board, and this is actually the same blend of fibre that you saw in the bat. These are actually some experiments that I did when I was making one of the Yarn Yarns mystery fibre clubs quite a few months ago. If you're not aware, I have my own little online shop, and at the moment I'm offering monthly mystery fibre clubs. And so this is a Rolag that I made on my blending board. So this is various colours of Corriedale with a little bit of sari silk. I do also have another slight variation on a Rolag to share with you, and this is one that I made on my hand cards directly from a fleece. So this was a fleece that I recently purchased, and I've been experimenting with different fibre preps for that fleece to figure out how I want to spin it. And if I hold these up next to each other, you might be able to tell this Rolag here is a lot more sort of light and fluffy and airy. As I say, it's just been made on my hand carders. This one is a little bit more compact. So again, I've cleared off my spindle, and we'll just, whoops, I've got another spindle rolling around on my desk. I'm running out of space here. So I'm just going to wrap a little bit of fibre around. I'm not being particularly fussy about how I start. And again, this is going to be somewhat textured because it's got the sari silk in, so we're not aiming for a smooth yarn, we're just again experimenting with the feel of working straight from this Rolag. So I'm going to give this a flick, and I've let the twist travel up into my fibre supply. My hand's well out of the way, so I'm not trapping that twist anywhere, and I'm just going to give a pull back. Now again, that is reasonably easy to draft back, but there is much more resistance than in the bat, but actually it feels quite nice to have that resistance. With the bat, I felt like I could keep pulling and pulling and pulling forever, and I wouldn't necessarily be too in control of the consistency of my yarn. But with this, that little bit of extra resistance means that I can keep track on the thickness of my yarn by eye. It's all done by hand, so there's no machines making it consistent, but I can let my eyes travel along and see that that's reasonably consistent. So maybe that's where I want to stop drafting. I mean, I can definitely do that with the bat as well, but I feel like that little bit of drag, that little bit of resistance gives me slightly more control. Whether that's a thing or whether that's just how I personally feel about it, I don't know, but I just thought it'd be interesting to note. So again, I'm going to sort of hold my fibre supply very lightly down here. I'm going to give my spindle a flick, and then I'm going to pull back, and again I've got that same sort of resistance. I can feel it. It's not drafting back as smoothly as the bat, it's not as hard as the comb top, even the pre-drafted comb top, but of course you don't have to spin the Rolag straight from the packet or straight from the blending board. You can do a little bit of fibre prep like we did with the comb top and do a little bit of pre-drafting. The one thing obviously to be mindful of with the pre-drafting is once you've drafted your fibre out, you're never going to be able to spin it thicker again, or not without having to keep layering it over the top of your singles. If you want to spin a thicker yarn, just be mindful about how much you're pre-drafting. But anyway, I've pre-drafted quite a good length, so my Rolag's now hanging out down here, and you can see that has not got any twist in, but it is much finer than the Rolag. So yeah, let's give the spindle a flick and see how that does. So again, that's really nice and easy to pull back. I'm not meeting any sort of resistance with that, and I could keep going for as long as my arm is reaching. So that felt quite nice in terms of the spinning experience. And to get started, I can sit here and spin all day. Let's break this off and move on to our hand-carded Rolag preparation. So Spindle is clear again. Let's get going with Rolag that I have prepped from Fibre. And this is probably going to be the most inconsistent in terms of spinning, because there are quite a few sort of neps and bits and pieces in here where I've done my own fibre prep. But again, this is not necessarily a demonstration of spinning consistent yarn. This is just an experiment in terms of how different fibre preps might spin up and the ease of which you can make yarn from different fibre preps using the support spindle. So don't judge my consistency. I might do another video later on down the line where we look more at consistency. I've attached my fibre to the spindle, so I'm going to give it a spin, letting my twist travel up, and I'm pulling back. And this is very similar experience to the bat, in that I'm pulling this back and pulling this back, and it might go forever if I if I let it. Not quite forever, the twist will run out, because there's quite a lot of airiness in this prep. The twist is not all bunching up in one place. It's got some room to gather, and that just means I can, you know, pull this back really quickly and really smoothly and make some reasonably stable yarn almost straight away. This is not entirely stable. I would want to give it another spin just to tighten that up, but we'll chat more about that in the little spinning demo that I'm going to do to round this video up. So twist, letting the twist join up, and I'm pulling back, and I'm making a nice long piece of yarn. So in terms of sort of speed of making yarn, this is a really nice prep. Okay, let's stop spinning and take a quick look at those singles that we've just made from that little bit of really quick, not super scientific exploration of fibre prep. So just a quick recap. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and this could be quite a long video, but I hope, again, there's something useful and worthwhile in it for you. This is just a really kind of non-scientific experiment, just a quick exploration, and there could be whole videos made on each of these things and we still wouldn't have exhausted the topic. But to make this little experiment as consistent as possible, I used the same tools for spinning these yarns, or these singles I should say. So this is my Enid Ashcroft support spindle, along with an Enid Ashcroft sort of lap bowl or lap tray. And I've just wound my yarns onto this card. So I wound these in the wrong order really, but this one here is the first one that we spun from Comb Top, and you might be able to see it's very thick and thin, and I had real trouble pulling back the fibre and making yarn. It was a real effort to draft against my fibre supply to make this yarn straight from the Comb Top. Had a little bit more success with the yarn, the Comb Top yarn, after I pre-drafted it, but it's still reasonably thick and thin. I don't know how well this is going to be focusing or showing up on the camera. This was much easier, but it still wasn't the easiest, the most pleasant spinning experience. Then moving across the card, here is the yarn or the singles that we spun from the bat, and again all I did with the bat was just strip a fibre straight off of the bat. I didn't do any other prep, and it was really easy to let the twist up into my fibre supply and to make reasonably consistent yarn. There are some inconsistencies, but that in part is down to the fibre blend. These bits which are a bit thicker have got a lot of the sari silk that is part of that bat that I made, but if you look across the sort of 3 strands that have got more of the just corridale content, they're reasonably consistent. So this was the Rolag prep off of my blending board. This side here was the fibre where I did a little bit of pre-drafting from the Rolag, and again there are some inconsistencies. I only spun a really small sample, and this does have the sari silk which is giving extra texture, but it's actually reasonably consistent for something that again I just spun straight from the Rolag, no extra prep. This yarn here is the one that I spun where I pre-drafted the Rolag, and I feel like taking into account again the sari silk texture, this one is a little bit more consistent, so just doing that little bit of pre-drafting helped me, and it also helped the spinning experience. So this one was quite nice to spin, but there was quite a bit of resistance in the fibre supply once the twist had gone up, and it was a little bit harder for me to draft, but I actually quite liked that feeling, but my arm would definitely be working harder to make this yarn. This one, there was a lot less resistance in that fibre supply after a bit of pre-drafting, and I could see myself spinning with this fibre prep for a long time before I needed to take a little bit of a break. And then this is the fibre that I spun from my hand carded Rolag prep. As you can see, this is the finest of the fibre. Was able to very easily let a fair amount of twist up into my fibre supply and still be able to pull back and draft from that fibre supply with very little effort. For the final section of this video, I just want to sit and spin for a little while and try and talk to you and chat to you about what I'm feeling as I'm spinning, and what's happening with my hands, what I'm feeling when I'm drafting back my fibre. I'm going to be switching up my spindle for this. Again, I just want to reiterate that the way you're seeing me spin on the camera is not the way that I would usually spin. I don't usually spin in front of me like this, although you can do that. Particularly if you're using a lap bowl, you'll be spinning in front of you, but I tend to spin off to the side when I'm usually spinning. So if you are struggling with, particularly with your shoulders, you might want to adjust how you're positioning yourself when you're doing support spindling. For this little demo, I am going to continue with the spin that I've got in progress, and I'm currently spinning through beautiful quantity of fibre that I got from Wonderful Wool. It is a Corriedale, Polworth and Rose blend. I'm going to be using my smallest spindle from the spindle shop in Australia, and I thought this would be quite a nice one to use to demo because it'll be easier for me to keep in the camera angle because it is quite a short one. You might be thinking, why are you using comb top given that experiment that you've just done, that was your least favourite fibre? Well, I'm actually going to be spinning this comb top from the fold. So rather than spinning straight from the top as it is, with all fibres aligned, I'm actually going to be pulling off a staple length, and actually I'll show you how I prep this. What I tend to do is draft out my staple length and split it down, draft it out and split it down, draft it out and split it down, and I tend to do that a few times before I get ready to spin. One word of caution, I will say, this works with this particular fibre because it is a semi-solid fibre. If you have fibre that maybe has several different colours in the dye, and maybe those colours go over the staple length, the more you draft and puff this up, the more you're going to be mixing the colours. So you might want to bear that in mind when you're spinning, because it might affect the look of your final yarn. So you can see just by pre-drafting that out a couple of times, I've gone from quite a compact sort of skinny bit of comb top to a nice fluffy preparation. I'm going to put this staple length over my finger, fold it over my finger, and I'm going to be spinning from the tip here. So I'm spinning from a folded piece of fibre, which is jumbling up that fibre a little bit. This is my preferred method of spinning comb top on a support spindle. So if you've just watched me spinning through those different fibre preps and you're thinking, oh goodness, I've not got different types of fibre to spin with, I only got comb top in my stash, have a go at spinning from the fold. As I say, really a demonstration of that is more just me chatting about what I'm going to be doing as I'm spinning. So yeah, let's get on and spin. Okay, so obviously I've already got my spin started here on my spindle. I've got my comb top folded over my finger. I've done my little bit of pre-drafting. I've puffed out the end of the tip, and the way I'm going to get myself joined is just by angling the sort of fluffed out tip down towards my fibre supply that's already attached to my spindle, give my spindle a flick, and then I can just slowly draw my finger back and my fibre is attached. These fibres want to be together, so it's no more difficult than that. So now my fibre is attached, I can start spinning through the quantity that I've got on my finger. So just in the same way that we've been doing through our other experiments, I'm just going to give my spindle a good flick. This one is really light, so it spins for a long time. I've let the fibre travel up into my fibre supply, and I can start pulling back with my arm. And really I'm just judging by eye the consistency of the singles that I'm making. Twist you let up into your fibre supply, the more energy you've stored there, and potentially the longer length of yarn that you can spin at one time. However, that's not necessarily important to me. I don't think it's a race to make these yarns, they're slow crafts. I'm not rushing through, but that's just something to bear in mind. The lighter your spindle, or the more aggressive you can spin it and flick it and get it twisting, the more twist comes up into here, and potentially the more fibre you can make in sort of one pullback of your fibre supply. So I'm just going to do that one more time. So I'm giving my spindle a good flick. I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm not, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm letting the spin sort of wear itself out, but I'm supporting that spindle, and now I am going to pull back with my fibre supply, and as I pull back it's bringing little bits of fibre from that folded fibre and making my singles yarn. Now when I'm pulling back, I'm actually pulling back really gently, because my twist is obviously dissipating over the length of fibre between my spindle and my hand, and the longer I pull back, the less twist will be in each little section of that yarn. So let me try and sort of demonstrate what I mean. If I do one flick and then pull back to here, then all of the energy in that flick is congregating in this little bit of yarn here, so that piece of yarn is quite stable. However, if I do one flick and then I pull back my full arm's length, that twist has got a lot further distance to travel, which potentially means that my yarn, although you can see I'm making my singles, my yarn is not yet that stable. So if I give it a good pull, it's just going to break away from my fibre supply. So when I'm doing that initial pullback, I'm going really gently, and I'm just keeping an eye on my singles yarn, trying to judge my pullback so that I get a reasonably consistent thickness. If one of the issues you're having when you're support spindling is your yarn breaking as you're pulling back your fibre supply, then try being a little bit more gentle as you come back. Also, it could be just that you're not adding enough twist to your spindle, in which case you might want to try a slightly lighter spindle, or you might want to try and make a slightly thicker yarn. All these factors kind of feed into the stability of your singles as you're making them. I'm going to reattach this so I can show you how I do that again. I'm just pulling out I've folded my fibre supply over my finger, pulling out the tip slightly to fluff it up, and then I'm just going to angle my finger down so the fluffed out tip is lightly resting on top of the yarn that's attached to my spindle. I can give my spindle a flick and the yarn just wants to naturally attach. If it's not naturally attaching, then maybe try and hold the fibre supply a little bit closer. I'm flicking my spindle, I'm pulling back gently, and I'm trying to, as I go, sort of judge the consistency of my yarn. But I am going gently because this yarn is not stable yet. And when I have pulled my fibre supply back and I am happy that I've got a consistency that I want in that little stretch of yarn, I'm going to flick my spindle again. And now when I tug on this spindle, that yarn's not going anywhere. Again, I'm only gently tugging because I don't want to over twist my yarn. Gently tug back on that and it's not pulling apart in the same way as it was on my first pass. And if that feels a bit too faffy for you doing that double twist, then don't pull your fibre supply back so far. So I've twisted and I've pulled back a little way and that yarn is nice and stable. So I could twist again if I wanted to maybe, and pull back. And all the while I'm doing it, I'm just gently tugging my yarn to make sure that it's stable enough. And if it's not, I'm going to add a little bit more twist. If it's fine, then I can roll it onto my spindle. So twist, pull back gently, achieve my consistency, or not to start with, you know, it's all practice. But I've been support spindling for quite some time now, so my yarns are becoming more and more consistent. So if you're getting slightly lumpy bumpy yarn to start with, don't despair. It's all part of the learning process. As long as that yarn is holding together and your fibre is not drifting apart, you've done a good job. Give it a gentle tug. I can feel that there's still a little bit of movement in my yarn here, so I'm going to give my spindle another twist. And now when I gently tug it back, there's no movement, or there's movement, there's elasticity, but the fibres aren't pulling apart, so I know that's strong enough to hold up and survive the plying process. So spin, pull back. And again, I haven't pulled back very far on that, so that yarn is already nice and strong and consistent, so I don't need to do another twist into that. Spin, pull back, and pulling back further this time, so when I give this a tug I can feel that the fibres are still wanting to sort of pull apart, which is fine if you want to make your yarn a little bit finer. You know, you can judge your thickness in your draft at this point. If your yarn is not as thin as you want it to be or as consistent as you want it to be, then you can manipulate it a little bit more. Just again, do it gently so you're not dragging anything apart, and then when you're happy with that length of yarn that you can see in your hand, then you can give that another twist to strengthen that up. Now there are occasions where, depending on your fibres, you might end up pulling out your fibre and you get something that's a little bit thick, a little bit slubby. You can go back and even that out. So I'm going to try and intentionally make a slightly thicker bit of yarn. It's always harder. Not sure how well you can see that, but I have left this bit here intentionally thicker than what's on my spindle. Because this yarn is not yet twist locked, I haven't done my sort of second spin to lock that twist in and make this yarn stable. I still have room to manipulate it. I'm going to wind my singles onto my spindle as much as I can so that I can get this slub between my hands, and my hands are fairly close together. I'm going to give my fibre a pinch here because I know my yarn is stable to this point, and I'm going to give my yarn a pinch here because I don't want to pull apart anything other than what's between my hands, so the slubby bit, and I can pull this out gently to even out the thickness. On this particular slub I've managed to thin it out at this end, but it's still quite thick this end, so I'm going to pinch my fingers closer again to, although this yarn is not yet stable, it's not complete, I don't want to make this bit any thinner, so I'm just controlling sort of where I'm stretching this fibre out until I'm happy, and then I can let that go gently, and again put another gentle twist into that, and that should then twist lock that in, and that fibre is much more consistent compared to what I've already got on my spindle. So I've made a sort of temporary home for my singles at the top of my spindle here. I want to make some more room now to add some more of this yarn up here. So I'm just going to butterfly this off around my fingers. And this process is actually another good test for whether your yarn is strong enough to hold up, because you will be putting a little bit of pressure on your yarn here to keep it under tension to wind it off so it doesn't sort of curl back on itself. And obviously if your yarn is not strong enough, it's going to pull apart. Oops, dropped my spindle there. And then I'm just going to wind it onto the bottom, to the main cup of my yarn. And here comes the rain. We're spinning in the rain. Quick little break there to let the rainstorm pass. Going to try and start wrapping things up now, but one last thing to share, if the noisy bird outside will let me, is one thing to think about when you're building fibre supply up. Most often you will see people building their main cob and then the temporary cob, but obviously with a support spindle you also need to be able to flick your spindle. So you're going to be touching the top of your spindle to give it a flick to get it in motion. If you can, try and avoid making your temporary cob near the top of the shaft of your spindle, because if you're flicking but also compacting, compressing, potentially like matting, fulling, slightly felting the singles that you've made, then you're going to be changing the consistency of your yarn. So you want to try and avoid doing that if you can. That could also interfere when you're trying to wind your singles off. You're going to make that job harder for yourself. You have been sort of compacting, compressing, slightly felting the singles that you've already made. I think we have finally reached the end. I'm not sure how well I got my thoughts across, but as I said at the beginning, my intention was more of a sort of general exploration of some things that might affect your experience spinning with the support spindle, might be holding you back from having a lovely spinning experience with your spindle. So if you have started exploring support spindle spinning and maybe haven't been having the best of times, then hopefully there are a few ideas in here to help you sort of change things up, explore different ways of working with your spindle, and to ultimately hopefully help you get going along your way. I hope that you find your perfect spindle bowl fibre prep combination, because once you get it, it's just an absolute real joy. And if you find something that gives you half as much pleasure as I get from my support spindles, then I'm sure you will have a wonderful time. Do feel free to chat all things support spindling in the comments below. Let me know if you found the video helpful, if there's anything in here that you'd like me to explore further. I feel like this might be a fairly lengthy video, but also we've really only just sort of skimmed to the surface. Let me know your favourite spindle makers. Let me know if you have got support spindling hints, tips and tricks that you can share with other members of our community. We would love to hear. This video is by no means an exhaustive list, it's just a few thoughts and a few quick little experiments to get you thinking about support spindling. If you have enjoyed the video and you would like to support the content I make here on the channel, there's a link to a Ko-fi page below if you'd like to make a one-off donation, or you can sign up to my Patreon to become a regular supporter of the channel. I'll be back again soon, I'm sure, with some more making content here on the channel. I hope you will join me for the next video, but until we do get to spend time together again, I hope you get to do some of the things that you enjoy. Great big woolly hugs to you all. Bye for now.